October 14th, 2023. The Great Smoky Mountains of eastern Tennessee. Marcus Thompson's hiking pole strikes something beneath the leaves. The sound is unmistakable. Steel, not stone. He calls his friends over, and together they pull aside thick curtains of kudzu and Virginia creeper. What emerges makes them freeze. A military jeep. Olive drab paint, faded with rust. A Willys MB from World War II. But it's what they see through the shattered windscreen that makes Marcus reach for his phone. A human skeleton sits behind the steering wheel, hands still curved around where the hard rubber grips would have been. The dog tags around the neck bones are corroded but legible. Private Andrew Michael Johnson. Serial number 34782591, United States Army. Born 1923. A cross-reference with military records reveals something that shouldn't be possible. Private Johnson was reported missing on September 12, 1945, 78 years ago. He'd been 22 years old when he disappeared, a veteran who'd survived D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, and he'd been less than 30 miles from home. Andrew Johnson's last letter home was postmarked August 28, 1945, from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Dear Mother, Mary, and Sarah, I'm almost home, finishing up the discharge paperwork this week. Should be in Gatlinburg by September 15th at the latest. Can't wait to see you all. Tell Mary I love her and we'll set a wedding date as soon as I get there. Tell Sarah I'm bringing her a birthday present from France. I'll see you all very soon. All my love, Andrew. That letter arrived in Gatlinburg on September 14th, 2 days after Andrew had already left Fort Campbell, 2 days after something had gone wrong. The Jeep sits at an angle in the ravine, front end lower than the rear. The skeletal hands remain in position on the wheel, finger bones still curved, the skull tilted slightly forward. Fragments of an olive drab uniform cling to the bones. On the passenger seat lies an M1 Garand rifle, standard issue. In the glove compartment, protected somewhat from 8 decades of decay, investigators find discharge papers. Date, September 12, 1945. Destination, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. In what remains of Andrew's uniform pocket, they find his wallet. Inside, protected by layers of deteriorated leather, is a photograph. A young woman with auburn hair and green eyes. On the back, her handwriting is still faintly visible. To Andrew, all my love forever. Mary. Mary Sullivan, his fiancée, the girl who'd promised to wait for him. September 12, 1945, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Andrew Johnson rises early, filled with nervous excitement. Today is his last day in the United States Army. By afternoon, he'll be a civilian, free to go home, free to start the life he'd put on hold for 3.5 years. The discharge process is efficient but time-consuming. Around noon, he receives his discharge papers, the official DD Form 214, honorably discharged. He receives his final pay, several $100s in cash, accumulated salary and discharge bonus. He's allowed to keep his uniform. His rifle and ammunition are turned into the armory, but he purchases his M1 Garand for a nominal fee. Discharged soldiers are permitted to buy their service rifles. The problem is transportation. The Army provides rides to major cities, but Gatlinburg isn't a major city. It's a small mountain town requiring travel through the Smoky Mountains on roads that range from adequate to barely passable. Around 1 p.m., a private first class named Thomas Miller overhears Andrew asking about transportation. Miller has been assigned to temporary motor pool duty. He has access to a Jeep that needs to be moved from Fort Campbell to a depot in Seversville, Tennessee. I can get you most of the way there, Miller tells Andrew. I'm supposed to deliver this Jeep to the depot in Seversville by tomorrow. I can drop you in Gatlinburg on the way. It's not much of a detour. Then Miller's orders change. His sergeant assigns him to different duty. The Jeep delivery is postponed. Miller feels bad about the change in plans. He makes Andrew an offer. Look, I'll square it with my sergeant. You take the Jeep and drive yourself to Gatlinburg. Drop it at the Seversville depot tomorrow or the next day. They're not in a hurry for it. There are hundreds of these things being surplused. No one's going to care if it takes an extra day to get there. Andrew hesitates. Technically, he's no longer military personnel. His discharge is effective immediately. Driving a military vehicle without authorization could be problematic, but Miller insists. Andrew has earned the favor after 3 years of combat service. Finally, Andrew agrees. He loads his duffel bag into the back, places his rifle on the passenger seat. The Jeep is a standard Willys MB, well used with dents and scrapes, but the engine runs smoothly. The tires are in good condition. Before leaving, Andrew stops at the base post office. One final letter home, written that morning. I'm coming home today. Should arrive tomorrow afternoon. Can't wait to see you all. Love, Andrew. That letter will arrive in Gatlinburg on September 14th. His family will read it with joy. They won't know Andrew is already missing. Andrew departs Fort Campbell at approximately 2 p.m. The route to Gatlinburg is roughly 200 miles through mountainous terrain. In 1945, this isn't a journey to be taken lightly. The roads are narrow, winding, often unpaved in remote sections. The most direct route means 6 to 8 hours of driving on roads that range from paved highways to mountain tracks barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. Several people see Andrew during the early part of his journey. A gas station attendant in Clarksville remembers filling the Jeep's tank around 3:30 p.m. A waitress at a diner in Springfield serves Andrew coffee and pie around 5 p.m. She notes that he seems happy and excited, talking about getting home to see his fiancée. After Springfield, the sightings end. Andrew's route takes him into increasingly remote mountain country. By the time darkness falls around 7:30 p.m., he's driving mountain roads with minimal lighting, no modern safety features, no guardrails, no reflective markers. The exact route he takes after leaving Springfield remains uncertain. There are several possible ways to reach Gatlinburg, some more direct but more difficult, others longer but on better roads. What investigators later determine is that Andrew takes a route through the mountains on roads that are little more than improved logging tracks, perhaps trying to save time, perhaps following directions that seemed reasonable, perhaps simply making the kind of navigation error that was common before GPS or reliable road signs. Somewhere on those mountain roads, in the darkness of that September night, Andrew Johnson's journey ends. Friday, September 13th, 1945, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Helen Johnson rises early to prepare breakfast, but this morning is different, filled with anticipation. Andrew's letter said he'd be home by mid-September. He could arrive any day. Helen watches the road constantly, hoping to see her son walking up the path. Sarah, Andrew's younger sister, is even more excited. Her 17th birthday is coming up on September 20th. Having Andrew home to celebrate makes the wait almost unbearable. Mary Sullivan visits the Johnson house that morning. She's done this almost daily for months. She helps Helen clean the house one more time, making sure everything is perfect for Andrew's homecoming. They prepare his room, washing the sheets, arranging his few possessions exactly as he left them 3 years earlier. By afternoon, when Andrew hasn't appeared, no one is particularly worried. His letter said mid-September. That could mean any day over the next week. Travel is unpredictable during the massive demobilization. Friday, September 14th, the letter Andrew mailed from Fort Campbell arrives. Helen opens it with trembling hands, reads Andrew's words aloud. I'm coming home today, should arrive tomorrow afternoon. The joy is immediate and overwhelming. Andrew left Fort Campbell on Thursday. Tomorrow afternoon would have meant Friday, yesterday. He should already be here. He must have been delayed somehow, but he's on his way. He'll be home any time now. They wait all day Saturday, Sunday. By Monday, September 17th, the excitement has turned to confusion, then worry. Andrew's letter said he left Fort Campbell on Thursday. The drive from Kentucky to Gatlinburg might take all day, but certainly not 4 days, even allowing for breakdowns or bad weather. Andrew should have arrived by now. Helen calls Fort Campbell on Monday morning. After being transferred multiple times and waiting over an hour, she finally reaches someone who can check discharge records. Ma'am, Private Johnson was discharged on September 12th as scheduled. He left the base that afternoon. We don't have any information about his travel after that. But he never arrived home, Helen explains, her voice shaking. He wrote that he was coming straight here. Where is my son? The clerk promises to look into it. That call comes 3 days later, September 20th, Sarah's 17th birthday, which should have been a celebration with Andrew home. Instead, it becomes a day of growing dread. Mrs. Johnson, I've spoken with Private First Class Thomas Miller, who was the last person to see your son at Fort Campbell. According to Miller, he loaned Andrew a military jeep to drive home. The jeep hasn't been returned to the depot as expected. Both Private Johnson and the vehicle are missing. The investigation that follows is hampered by the chaos of post-war demobilization. The Army is processing thousands of discharges daily, dealing with enormous logistical challenges. One missing soldier and one missing jeep, while concerning, is not a high priority. Local law enforcement in Gatlinburg and surrounding counties is notified. Sheriff's deputies drive the most likely routes between Fort Campbell and Gatlinburg, looking for any sign of Andrew or the jeep. They check with gas stations and diners. Several people remember seeing a young soldier in an Army jeep, but the sightings end somewhere east of Springfield. The search is complicated by the terrain. The route from Springfield to Gatlinburg crosses some of the most rugged country in Tennessee. Countless small roads, logging tracks, remote areas where a vehicle could go off the road and not be visible from the traveled path. In 1945, there are no helicopters to conduct aerial searches, no sophisticated rescue equipment, just men on foot and in vehicles trying to cover hundreds of square miles of mountain wilderness. Helen Johnson spends her life savings hiring private searchers, posting rewards, doing everything a desperate mother can do. Mary Sullivan joins every search party, walking mountain roads and calling Andrew's name until her voice gives out. Sarah writes to everyone she can think of, the Army, the FBI, newspapers, congressmen, begging for help finding her brother. The searches continue sporadically for months, then years. Every spring when the snow melts and the mountains become possible again, new searches are organized. Every time someone reports seeing an abandoned vehicle or finding something that might be related to Andrew, investigators follow up. But the mountains hold countless ravines and remote areas. A vehicle that went off a mountain road in the wrong place could be invisible from above and inaccessible from below. Dense forest growth can swallow man-made objects within months. In 1948, 3 years after Andrew's disappearance, the Army officially declares him missing and presumed dead. The declaration is necessary for administrative purposes, allowing Helen to receive Andrew's military benefits, but it provides no answers about what actually happened to her son. Helen refuses to accept that Andrew is dead. She maintains his room exactly as he left it, keeping his clothes hanging in the closet, his books on the shelves. She continues to celebrate his birthday every year, setting a place for him at the table. Friends and family gently suggest she needs to accept reality and move forward, but Helen is adamant. Until someone shows her proof of Andrew's death, her son is simply missing, and someday he'll come home. Mary Sullivan waits for Andrew for 7 years. Finally, in 1952, she accepts that he's gone. She eventually marries a local teacher, has children, lives a full life, but she tells friends that part of her heart remains forever in 1945, waiting for a young soldier who never arrived. Sarah Johnson carries her brother's disappearance like an open wound throughout her life. She becomes a nurse, marries, raises children, eventually has grandchildren, but she never stops wondering what happened to Andrew, never stops hoping that someday, somehow, the mystery will be solved. She maintains meticulous files of correspondence with the Army, police reports, newspaper clippings, detailed notes about every search effort and every reported sighting. By the time of her death in 2019, she's accumulated dozens of boxes of documents related to her brother's case. Helen Johnson dies in 1982 at age 84, having spent 37 years not knowing what happened to her son. Her last words, according to Sarah, are, "Tell Andrew I waited for him." Mary Sullivan dies in 2015 at age 90. The photograph Andrew carried in his wallet, still in her possession, kept in a small frame on her bedside table throughout her life. Sarah Johnson dies in 2019 at age 91, having lived 74 years with the mystery of her brother's disappearance. In her final months, she tells her grandchildren that the hardest part wasn't accepting that Andrew was dead. It was never knowing how or where he died, never having a grave to visit, never having closure. None of them lived to learn that Andrew had been less than 30 miles from home when he died, that he'd been within a few hours of arriving at the door where they'd waited so desperately for him to appear. The 78 years between Andrew Johnson's disappearance and the discovery of his remains see the world transform. The roads Andrew had been driving in 1945 changed dramatically. The route he took, rough mountain tracks, barely more than improved logging roads, are abandoned in the 1950s when new highways are built. The old roads, no longer maintained or traveled, are gradually reclaimed by the forest. The specific section of road where Andrew's Jeep left the pavement and plunged into the ravine had been particularly remote even in 1945. By the 1960s, it's completely overgrown, invisible to anyone who doesn't know exactly where to look. The forest does what forests do. It grows, spreads, covers, absorbs everything man-made until the area looks as it had before humans ever carved roads through it. The Jeep itself becomes part of the landscape. The olive drab paint fades and is covered by rust. Vines grow over and around it. Leaves accumulate inside and out. Small animals make homes in the engine compartment and under the seats. Trees grow up around it, their roots gradually embracing the metal frame. Within a decade of the accident, the Jeep is difficult to see even from a few feet away. Within 2 decades, it's essentially invisible. When Sarah Johnson dies in 2019, her granddaughter Jennifer inherits the boxes of documents about Andrew's case. Jennifer, a lawyer with an interest in historical mysteries, is fascinated by the story. She considers trying to mount a new search using modern technology, but by 2019, 74 years have passed since Andrew's disappearance. Anyone who might have had direct knowledge is long dead. The trails went cold decades earlier. Jennifer scans all of Sarah's documents and creates a digital archive, uploading it to a website dedicated to missing World War II veterans. The site attracts some attention from historians and genealogists, but it generates no new leads about Andrew's fate. The area of the Smoky Mountains where Andrew's Jeep ultimately is discovered sees minimal human presence for decades. The old logging roads are abandoned. Modern highways divert traffic away from the remote hollows and ridges. The creation of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park protects vast areas from development, allowing the forest to return to something approaching its pre-settlement condition. Occasionally, hikers venture into the more remote areas, but most stay on established trails. The ravine where Andrew's Jeep came to rest is in an area that isn't on any mountain maps, in terrain difficult enough to discourage casual exploration. You have to be specifically looking for unmarked old roads to end up in that area, which is exactly what Marcus Thompson and his friends are doing. Marcus Thompson has been fascinated by local history since childhood. His grandfather told him stories about the lumber industry that dominated the Smoky Mountains in the early 20th century. As a history teacher, Marcus turns that childhood interest into a serious hobby, researching old logging operations, trying to locate the roads and infrastructure they left behind. In October 2023, Marcus obtains copies of 1940s-era Forest Service maps showing old roads that no longer appear on modern surveys. He's particularly interested in a network of roads built to access logging operations in what is now the national park. Using historical maps and modern GPS, Marcus and 3 friends try to trace the old routes and document what remains. The area they're exploring on October 14th is particularly challenging. Steep terrain covered in dense vegetation. No obvious signs of the road that should exist based on their maps. They're following a ravine that the historical maps showed as parallel to one of the old roads, thinking they might find evidence of the route along the ridgeline above. When Marcus's hiking pole strikes the Jeep's metal frame, his first thought is that they found remnants of old logging equipment. The forest is full of abandoned machinery from the lumber industry. old cables, metal parts, even entire pieces of equipment left behind when operations shut down. But as they clear away the vegetation, the distinctive shape becomes obvious. This isn't logging equipment, it's a vehicle, and from its style, clearly a very old one. The moment Marcus sees the military olive drab paint beneath the rust, he knows they've found something historically significant. Then they see the skeleton. Marcus immediately calls 911, carefully noting the GPS coordinates, making sure no one touches anything that might be evidence. The Sevier County Sheriff's Office responds first, followed by Tennessee State Police. When the first officers arrive and see the Jeep and its occupant, they immediately recognize the historical significance. By late afternoon, representatives from the Department of Defense, military historians, and forensic anthropologists have joined what becomes a carefully coordinated recovery operation. The scene is photographed extensively before anyone attempts to disturb anything. The Jeep's position in the ravine, the surrounding terrain, the vegetation growth patterns, all documented to help reconstruct what happened 78 years earlier. The Jeep itself is remarkably well preserved despite nearly 8 decades of exposure to the elements. The basic structure remains intact. The engine, though seized and corroded, is still recognizable. The tires have rotted away to nothing, leaving only the bare metal wheels. The seats have deteriorated to their metal frames, but fragments of the original fabric and padding remain. The skeletal remains are in the exact position one would expect of someone who had been driving when death occurred, sitting upright, hands positioned on the steering wheel, feet apparently on the pedals. The position suggests that death came quickly. There was no time to try to exit the vehicle or even to move from the driving position. The skull shows significant trauma consistent with severe neck injury. Forensic examination later confirms that the second cervical vertebra, the axis, has been fractured in a pattern typical of broken neck injuries. Death would have been nearly instantaneous, which at least means Andrew did not suffer. The forensic analysis of the accident scene and Andrew's remains provides a clear picture of what happened on that September night in 1945. The section of mountain road where the Jeep went over the edge had been particularly treacherous, even by 1945 standards. The route featured a series of tight switchbacks with steep drop-offs and no guardrails. In daylight and with modern roads, the curves would have been challenging but manageable. At night, in a vehicle with limited lighting, after hours of difficult driving, they were genuinely dangerous. The skid marks that existed on the road surface in 1945 are long gone, but the Jeep's position and the damage patterns tell the story. Andrew had been descending a steep grade when he encountered a sharp curve. Either he'd been going too fast for the conditions, or he'd misjudged the curve's sharpness and the limited visibility. The Jeep left the road surface and dropped approximately 15 feet into the ravine below. The impact was severe but not catastrophic. The Jeep didn't roll. It landed on its wheels and came to rest tilted forward on the ravine's sloping floor. But the sudden deceleration and impact were enough to cause fatal injury to Andrew's neck, even though there was no visible trauma to the skull or other bones. The second cervical vertebra shows a classic hangman's fracture, a break that occurs when the head is suddenly thrown backward or forward with sufficient force to fracture the bone that connects the skull to the spine. In Andrew's case, the fracture pattern is consistent with his head being thrown forward on impact and then snapping back. This type of injury results in immediate unconsciousness and death within seconds or minutes at most. Andrew would not have suffered. He would have driven around the curve, felt the Jeep leave the road, experienced the brief sensation of falling, and then nothing. It would have been over before he could have understood what was happening. The timing is cruelly ironic. Andrew had been approximately 28 miles from Gatlinburg when the accident occurred. At the speeds possible on 1945 mountain roads, he'd been perhaps an hour and a half from home. If the accident had happened a few curves later, or if Andrew had decided to stop for the night and drive the final distance in daylight, or if he'd chosen any of a dozen different routes, the outcome might have been completely different. But on that specific curve, at that specific time, after days of processing and travel, exhausted from the emotional toll of leaving the army and the physical toll of driving mountain roads all day, Andrew made a small error in judgment. And that error cost him everything. The news that Andrew Johnson has been found 78 years after his disappearance spreads quickly through Gatlinburg and the surrounding communities. For older residents who knew the Johnson family, the discovery brings back memories of the intensive searches and the family's decades of not knowing. For younger residents who'd only heard the story as local history, it brings a legendary mystery suddenly and dramatically to life. Jennifer Johnson, Sarah's granddaughter and Andrew's great-niece, is contacted by the Sevier County Sheriff's Office on October 15th, the day after the discovery. The news that her great-uncle has finally been found is overwhelming. She'd grown up hearing about Andrew, had spent years organizing her grandmother's documents about his disappearance, but had never really expected the mystery to be solved. "My grandmother spent her entire adult life wondering what happened to her brother," Jennifer tells reporters. "She died 4 years ago, just a few years too soon to learn the truth. I'm devastated that she never got to know, but I'm grateful that we can finally give Andrew the burial and honor he deserved." The Department of Defense takes custody of Andrew's remains for proper military handling. In November 2023, a full military funeral is arranged at the Tennessee State Veterans Cemetery in Knoxville. The ceremony includes all the honors due to a combat veteran: a flag-draped casket, a military honor guard, a bugler playing tops, and the presentation of the folded flag to Jennifer Johnson as Andrew's closest living relative. Over 300 people attend the funeral, including distant relatives who never knew Andrew personally, World War II veterans from the few surviving members of Andrew's generation, and members of the local community moved by his story. The mayor of Gatlinburg speaks about Andrew's service and sacrifice. A military chaplain offers prayers for a young man who gave his country 3 years of service and died trying to come home. The photograph of Mary Sullivan that was found in Andrew's wallet is placed with his remains, buried with the young man who carried it across Europe and was carrying it home to her when he died. At the funeral, a distant cousin reads Andrew's last letter home, the one he mailed from Fort Campbell on September 12, 1945. "I'm coming home today. Should arrive tomorrow afternoon. Can't wait to see you all. Love, Andrew." There is not a dry eye in the assembly. The story of Andrew Johnson's discovery resonates far beyond Gatlinburg. National news media covered the story as an example of both tragedy and closure. World War II historians discuss the broader context of soldiers who survived the war only to die in accidents during the massive demobilization effort. The Tennessee Historical Commission places a memorial marker at the site where Andrew's Jeep was found. The marker tells Andrew's story and honors his service, ensuring that future hikers who might stumble across the site will understand its significance. In Gatlinburg, a small memorial is added to the town's World War II monument, listing Andrew's name among the local residents who served and died. A photograph of him in uniform, young and smiling, is displayed in the local history museum along with his medals and letters home. The Jeep, what remains of it after 78 years of decay, is left in the ravine where it came to rest. Removing it would require extensive excavation work that would damage the forest and serve no real purpose. Instead, it's documented thoroughly and left as an unintended memorial to Andrew and to all the young men who served their country and never made it home. The story prompts reflection on the costs of war that extended beyond the battlefield. Andrew Johnson survived some of World War II's most brutal combat: D-Day, the hedgerow fighting in Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge. He lived through experiences that killed hundreds of thousands of other young men. And then, in a peaceful Tennessee forest on a quiet September evening, his luck simply ran out. The discovery also highlights how dramatically search and rescue capabilities improved over the decades. In 1945, finding a vehicle in a mountain ravine required people physically searching on foot, limited to areas they could access and see. By 2023, technologies like GPS, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drone searches make it possible to find things that would have remained hidden forever just a few decades earlier. If Andrew had disappeared in 2023 rather than 1945, he would likely have been found within days. His cell phone would have transmitted his location, GPS would have tracked his route, helicopters with thermal imaging could have spotted the Jeep from the air. But in 1945, those technologies were pure science fiction, and a young soldier died within sight of home while searchers passed within yards of where he lay without ever knowing. For the Johnson family, the discovery brings the closure that 3 generations longed for but never expected to receive. Andrew's grave can now be visited. His name can be added to family documents, not as missing, but as died September 12, 1945. The wondering can finally end. Jennifer Johnson expresses what many in the family feel. "We are heartbroken that it took 78 years to find him. We're devastated that my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and so many others who loved him died without knowing what happened. But we're also grateful. Grateful that he's been found. Grateful that we can honor his service and his sacrifice properly. Grateful that the mystery has been solved and that Andrew can finally rest in peace." The story of Private Andrew Johnson serves as a reminder that wars create casualties long after the fighting ends. Andrew was a casualty of World War II just as surely as if he died on a French beach or in a German forest. The war sent him across an ocean, put him through unimaginable experiences, and ultimately set in motion the chain of events that led to his death on a Tennessee mountain road. But the story is also a testament to the power of never giving up. Helen Johnson died believing her son would someday be found. Sarah Johnson maintained meticulous records, convinced that eventually someone would solve the mystery. And 78 years later, their faith was vindicated. Andrew was found, identified, and brought home. The young man who wrote "I'm coming home today" had finally arrived, 78 years late, but home at last. The war was over. The journey was complete. After nearly 80 decades of waiting, Private Andrew Johnson could rest. Welcome home, soldier. Your mother waited for you. Your fiancé waited for you. Your sister never stopped looking for you. You're home now, and you can finally be at peace.